distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a very warm welcome to this event, and particularly to the Nelson Mandela Foundation. My name is Nikiwe Bigicha, and I will be your MC and moderator for the day. Our founder, Nelson Mandela, believed in the power of dialogue as a central device in tackling and seeking solutions to some of the most intractable problems in the world. So that's why hosting dialogues, looking at and addressing critical societal issues remains one of the cornerstones of what we do at the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And we also know how passionately Madiba felt about education and its transformative power for individuals and uplifting societies. So that's why we are very excited to be part of this timely discussion aimed at exploring ways in which we improve access to and quality of education. Now, the Vodacom Group is a long-standing friend and partner of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Across the continent, it's a giant in the mobile, communication and technology space and plays a pivotal role in driving digital transformation and enabling a digital society. Now, by way of background, in 2021, Vodacom launched the Africa.Connected campaign. Now, that campaign was designed to accelerate economic recovery by driving digital inclusion and improving digital literacy. The campaign is underscored by the need for public-private partnerships that are an important cornerstone of continued success in digitalization. Now, this campaign included the creation of 6 research papers looking at the role of technology and partnerships across 6 key themes. So the paper that we are launching today, the 5th in that 6-part series, unpacks the current state of education across the continent. The report is entitled Connected Education: How Digital Technologies Can Transform Education in Sub-Saharan Africa. Today's panel discussion will focus on how digital technologies and connectivity, combined with the necessary regulatory frameworks and support from governments, can be leveraged to mitigate barriers to quality education across the continent. So that's our topic of discussion. We look forward to an informative and lively discussion with our speakers, whom I will be introducing shortly. But first, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause to deliver the welcoming address to this august institution, the acting CEO of the NMF, Professor Vern Harris.
Thank you, Nikiwe. Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and it's a real honor to be partnering on this with Vodacom. It's somewhat ironic that I'm requested to offer some opening remarks because I'm notorious here at the foundation for being a technophobe. I resist any upgrades, and I prefer pen and paper. But in defending myself, I always say to colleagues, but I'm living the legacy because Madiba never touched a computer in his life, and he only spoke on a mobile when someone handed him that mobile to take a call. I want to read you just a short extract from our archive. Madiba in conversation with one of his granddaughters, Nandi. This comes from an extraordinary archive. The conversations Madiba had while he was in prison in the 1980s. We started searching for this record in the 1990s during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Madiba personally joined that search in the early 2000s when we were setting up the Center of Memory. And it's only recently that we discovered what are the transcripts of those conversations. They're at the University of the Free State, Jonathan. I don't know if you knew they were there while you were Vice Chancellor. But I want to just read a few sentences from this transcript. So, Nandi arrives for this visit a little bit late. And this is what Madiba says to her. Always be punctual. It is not nice to disappoint these people here. This is the prison system. If you can't be here on time, always phone and just tell them what has happened so that they can then use the time to do something else that they have to do. Always keep a notebook so that you can regulate your life. You must know that you are in a different environment. She had just moved from a rural area into the city. You must know that you are in a different environment now, and you have to organize your life accordingly. Just keep a notebook. Now, I love reading content like that, pen and paper. Madiba always had a notebook with him. But then he goes on. Nandia just had a child, a son, and Madiba proceeds to give her some advice on bringing up this child. He starts by referring to someone that they both know, and he says, now, she is someone without independence. The husband decides all. That also is not good. That has been the problem in our society all along. But things are changing, even in the countryside. You must do things because they are right, not because you have been told. Prepare the child well for the life that he is going to lead. He must first and foremost know that he is a Mandela. If he is brought here, he must be taught in a computer field, because that is the future, and that is going to change our lives. Even in an ordinary job, like an attorney, he will be asked what he knows about electronics. Think about that. Madiba was good at giving advice. But for us here at the foundation, it's critical that we harness the digital in the work of justice, in the work of transforming our society. I remember during the very first hard lockdown, I was part of a think tank here where we were asking the question, is there not more we can do than simply take food parcels into vulnerable communities? And we were then saying to ourselves, but what people really need is money in their pockets so that they can decide what they're going to spend on food and what they're going to spend on data so that their children can keep doing classes remotely. But of course, funders aren't happy about putting money directly into people's hands. That think tank came to the conclusion that our society, through COVID, but other factors, is being changed fundamentally, and we have to do differently. And this is not a long speech; it's going to be very short from this point on. This morning I was trying to remember the conclusions this think tank came to. It identified 4 game changers, all of which are possible and are doable in our society. The first one was a universal income grant. The second one was free access to the internet. The third one was picking up on French economist Thomas Piketty, arguing for a progressive inheritance tax fund. In other words, wealthy people can't pass all their money on to their children. They can pass a reasonable amount on, but the rest goes into a fund. And from that fund, young people, as they become adults, receive grants to start a business, to get a university education. And then the fourth game changer was, we need an education system that is not geared to preparing young people to go out and find jobs. Structurally, unemployment is just going to grow and grow. We need an education system which draws young people into the digital and prepares them to go out into the world and generate income. I think that think tank did a good job. And here at the foundation, we embrace the digital as much as possible. This is a printout, and that's because I prefer paper. But it's digitized and it can be accessed using a computer. last thought is, whatever we do in terms of our education and our use of technology, we have to be mindful of the fact that the rapid advance in technologies, which we've seen since the early 1980s, has been accompanied by a spiraling inequality globally. And that tells us that those technologies haven't been harnessed to transforming our societies. And that's the challenge for us at the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Looking forward to the conversation. Thanks, Nikiwa.
Thank you so much, Vern, and you left your papers here. I don't know if you, Jackie. I'll make sure I can digitize them. Thank you so much, the acting CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Professor Vern Harris, and thank you so much once again for delighting us with those nuggets about Madiba's life. It's always such a pleasure to reflect on that, and particularly with your unique perspective and lens. So thank you for sharing that with us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as I said earlier, this is a partnership between the Nelson Mandela Foundation and Vodacom Group. So we've heard the welcoming address from Vern Harris. Let's now hear the perspective of the Vodacom Group CEO, Shamil Yusuf, who is joining us virtually. The wonders of technology, right? We are delighted that he can join us in that way, and have an introductory message from him.
Contribute to the creation of just societies and seeks to encourage dialogue on critical social issues. As a purpose-driven organization, we have a similar objective. Our goal is to connect people for a better and more inclusive future. Education is a critical component of this. As the bedrock of social and economic development, education is the key to realizing Africa's true potential. But we will also be able to unlock this potential when the necessary resources and infrastructure combined with the right regulatory frameworks and support from government and industry stakeholders are in place. In addition, we need to work together to mitigate the many barriers that our teachers, students in academic institutions face, from poor digital literacy and political instability to unreliable electricity, a lack of qualified teachers, and insufficient technical support. While these obstacles might seem significant, when the right minds come together with the right intentions and make the most of available technology, we can develop creative solutions to Africa's unique challenges. As the youngest continent, Africa is the future. Young Africans are expected to make up 42% of the world's youth by 2030. In order for these young people to take an active role in our continent's development battle, they must be equipped with the skills needed to add value to our global knowledge economy. If we do not act now, our young people will miss this opportunity. We, as an industry, as educators, as innovators, and as governments, must do what we can to incubate and develop our young talent, not only for their benefit, but also for the benefit of our future society. With the findings and recommendations provided in this paper we are launching today, we can all look forward to an exciting, digitally inclusive future. I now hand over to the panelists for what I hope will be a robust engagement on the role of digital technologies in transforming education in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you.
I know you can hear us, so let's give them a hearty round of applause. And thank you so much to Vodacom for its ongoing support and partnership with the Nelson Mandela Foundation as we have these joint goals about ensuring a more just and fairer society, not only in South Africa, but across all the other markets that Vodacom operates in as well. So thank you so much to Vodacom Group CEO Shamil Joseph. And without further ado now, it's time to introduce my panel. We're very fortunate to have very diverse and esteemed speakers who bring diverse experiences within the education space and technology as well, and to weave that conversation for us together. And we're looking forward to their inputs. Let me introduce them, and as I do so and read out their brief bios, if they could start making their way to the front, please. I'm pleased to invite to the front one of the authors of this particular report, and that is Professor Jonathan Jansen. He, of course, is a very prolific writer and educational specialist in South Africa, hardly needs introduction, but he is Distinguished Professor of Education at the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa, and currently President of the South African Academy of Science and the Knight Hennessy Fellow at Stanford University. And we're very delighted that he could join us today, and indeed on behalf of Vodacom, authored this particular report. Professor Jansen, please give him a warm round of applause. We're also delighted to be joined by Dr. Serena de Jager, who is a lecturer in the Humanities Education Department at the University of Pretoria and is a registered educational psychologist. Serena, you're most welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. Our next speaker and guest this morning is Sipho Mbisana, who describes himself as a dedicated educator at heart with very extensive experience in diverse educational environments. Previously has served as the head of school at UCT Online High School, that very ambitious project which started during lockdown, but is currently the deputy headmaster responsible for academic innovation at Jeppe Boys High School. Sipho, thank you so much for joining us, and you're most welcome. Our final speaker this morning is Karen Basie. Karen describes herself as a keen digital transformation and sustainable business leader with over 16 years experience. Currently, Karen is the Director for Sustainable Business, Social Impact and the Foundation at Safaricom, which of course we know that Vodacom Group has a stake in Safaricom in East Africa. A warm welcome, Karen, and thank you so much for joining us. Prof, I'll start with you, having been key to this discussion and indeed drafting this particular inquiry. If you could just give us an overview broadly of what you found, and by way of background, and outside of Vodacom, what for you prompted this line of inquiry?
Right, so thank you, Nukiwe. So there's two two sort of revelations, if you will, that brings us to this report and brought me to the report. The one, of course, was the pandemic itself, which had a really critical impact on the school system in particular, by revealing what we already knew, and that was the deep inequalities between across schools. That is, schools that moved seamlessly past remote to straightforward, online teaching and learning, to schools on the other extreme that had nothing, and you were lucky if you had WhatsApp downloads from your teacher, and you were lucky if your parents on the single device in the house had data, and to schools in the middle where there was a sort of a mix of, technology available and cost affordability. That was a big, and we will pay for many years to come, make no mistake, a cost for not dealing with those inequalities, etc. Then this side of the pandemic, of course, the PILS data, and you would have seen that things actually got worse from a few years ago, when 78% of our kids in grade 4 couldn't read full meaning. Now it's, of course, 81%. Now, I don't get scared very easily as a kid of the Cape Flats, but this scares the hell out of me, because it's not about reading. It's about being able to access the world, through reading. And so when Vodacom approached us to basically do the research for the study, I was very excited, because I don't know, in the absence of a government that takes its educational role seriously, I don't believe for a minute that the South African government takes this role seriously at all, that you have to figure out other ways in which to breach this divide that is, first of all, a social and economic divide, but of course reflected in that, a digital divide. Vodacom wisely decided that this is an Africa-wide study, and I have to say this to my shame, actually, and I was telling a colleague from Kenya, I was surprised by what was happening across the continent in spaces that you never hear about, where Vodacom was very active. For example, the first program that really made an impact on me was Code Like a Girl in Mozambique, for example. It was amazing to talk to those colleagues and young people and see how they themselves as young women get transformed, not just to participate in the digital economy, but to in fact become leaders within it, and so on. So I decided with my team to structure the report in such a way, and Vodacom was incredibly helpful. By the way, as an academic, we normally write very dry text, with big words in it, like epistemology and all that crap, And we gave the dry text to Vodacom. Man, I don't know where they got the graphic people, but this report, I now claim the report, because it is so beautifully put together, actually. But there was a lot of, look, I have a healthy suspicion of the private sector, just between you and me, But I have been really, really amazed at the commitment of Vodacom in places where they don't get much marketing, as in Kenya and Mozambique, and making a real difference on the ground. So, in the absence of a government, and we structured the report to sort of say, ideally, section, if a government came to the party, what do we know from other governments in Africa? Are there 5 or 6 or 7 things you must do to move the needle on digital inclusion, on the one hand? And what are the things that all of us need to know within the private or public sector that can, in fact, make a difference at scale? Because remember, the problem here is scale. Anybody can go into Soweto or into Kailicha or into, Chatsworth and do something digital there. But it's a very different ballgame. And this is where the public-private partnerships are important, to do that at scale.
Let's explore that a bit further, Prof. You mentioned that you were surprised by what you saw in other parts of the continent. Obviously, there are going to be differences between and within countries. But broadly speaking, some of the hurdles which you found, which were highlighted in this particular report, are to some extent uniform across the continent. Let's delve into those hurdles. For example, electricity, which is going to be a big inhibitor if indeed we are to increase at scale digital education and reduce that digital divide. What are you proposing as potential solutions as far as that is concerned?
Well, if you just take electricity, for example, there's a bunch of things that must go together, one of which is a government that has regulatory arrangements that make it easy for people to get access to electricity, that make data affordable once you have the electricity, that enables a company to come in the southwest of Nigeria and say, for example, in this area, we're going to connect all the high schools and make sure that they at least have access in times of, crisis like disruption that a pandemic causes. So that is a very real example of how you can do things in partnership to solve the electricity problem. Our electricity problem in South Africa is obviously, how can you not talk about Eskom? I don't for 1 minute believe this is an electricity problem. This is a political problem. This is an economic problem. This is a problem that if there is this ounce of political will, we can change this almost immediately. So, but it does require on the part of government putting in place the kind of infrastructure that suggests they are serious. Okay. Now, I always thought the idea of a minister of electricity was a joke, and I know Switler. He was a student of ours in Durban. But how about a minister of digital education?
I mean, and that is something that you propose in this particular report. Karen, let's bring you into this conversation. Professor Jansen has already flagged some of the innovations that you have been involved in East Africa, for example. Let's talk a little bit about that and give us a sense, some color into how you have intervened in the face of all of these challenges.
Okay, thank you very much, Anikiwe. So in 2016, we realized that education is the premise of any progress and development in a country. And we looked at ourselves as a technology provider and said, what do we have to offer? And so as a technology provider, we opened our technology to different groups and especially education. And so we developed the first educational apps, revision. And it didn't need a smartphone. You could do revision on USSD, and I think the cost is 0.5 rand per day. And why per day? We looked at the society and we realized that majority of our customers earn a living per day. So we cannot give them a bundle for education. And the most interesting thing is around 2018, the top student from the remotest part of Kenya had used our revision tool. And so it affirmed that what we're doing was right. Then comes the pandemic. And what does a purpose-led company do? The have-nots, the children of the have-nots were at home. The children of the haves switched into digital and continued with their studies. So we looked at this content and said we're going to zero rate it. So all you have to do is have access to a phone. So if your parents have access to a phone, you can do this. And when the pandemic came, we brought in 6 other partners to give free education content because we wanted to democratize digital education. Over and above that, we looked at a new partner called Zeraki, that's a partner featuring in the report, and said, how do we help? So many innovators have the apps. We have the technology. We have the muscle to market this for them. So we've opened up our technology. We've opened up our marketing space. So we can do for them above. We've used these apps and embedded them within the Safaricom application. So we realized we're tackling this thing from this app-based. So as a business, a year ago, we decided education is going to be our legacy. And what have we done? So right now, what excites me most is the project I'm working on. And I was sharing this with Kesini, and I was telling her that in this project, we are tackling education at all levels. So at the ECD, and we are building digital schools. As we made the promise to build from scratch, others will be renovations in all the 47 counties in Kenya. We are going to build this as the M-Pesa Foundation, digital schools and ready. Then we were faced with the next hurdle. We have the digital schools in Kenya, by the way, electricity penetration, 75% right now. all rural schools were connected. There was a policy by government to ensure that any school, and so the rest of rural Kenya benefited because if you're near a school, the transformer was there. So electricity in rural areas grew from 32 to 35%. So then we realized we're putting up digital schools, but where are the teachers? So we wrote a paper, combined efforts with Vodafone Foundation, and said we are going to train each and every teacher who leaves Kenyan teacher training college. So this is ongoing and we are launching this, I think, July 14th. We've already groundbroken. We are building these modern ICT labs in all the schools. So here we are building digital schools, building digital teachers. In 5 years, we'll have shifted this needle and lifted the flow of education in Kenya. At high school level, we realized that we want our children in Kenya to compete with that child in Japan, that child in China. So we said we will chart the way for the government. They will see what we are doing, and government has come on board. I had last week, World Bank has seen what we're doing. The World Bank wants to help Kenya go on the digital transformation journey. So we will build high schools, then we will focus on TVETs. So universities, we believe, are well equipped and they have the funding. So for us as a business that is purpose-led and we want to transform the lives of Kenyans and now Ethiopians, since we're in Ethiopia, we know that our technology can help bridge these gaps and then we can bring everyone together.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's where we are at.
Thanks, Karen. It's really encouraging to see all of these efforts and the extent to which you're beginning to move the needle. Starkly in this report that despite it's prohibitively high, you can zero rate to some extent in providing access to education. Expanding access to the internet still remains very low on the African continent and prohibitively expensive. How and in what ways are you going to make at scale interventions on that front as well?
So as a business, we realized we cannot do this alone. So we needed certain partners in place. So for instance, we noticed that we don't have the content. We got Cisco to help us with certain content. We've got Microsoft to come in. We've got Samsung, Huawei. So they focus on the hardware. Then we as a business sat down and said, we want to make content available. So if you look at most of our applications, as a business, we bear the cost. We bear the cost simply because we want everyone to be transformed and on this journey. I was looking at the price of internet across Africa, and I realized Kenya, our rates are pretty low because it's a decision that was made. But what we are also saying with UNICEF, we've worked with UNICEF, the government, ourselves, and Nokia, and said we are going to give schools packages that make sense. So we have special rates and education packages. When we started this, we said we want to penetrate certain schools. So we went into a pilot, we did the first 50 schools, and we realized that when we give them a good lower package, then it helps and that they can get it. Over and above that, the partners we have brought on the table are helping with this, but the best is the government. What we've been talking to the government is saying, if it is coming from the foundation side, because we are tax exempt, can we give this benefit to the people? So you need certain government policies and interventions to be able to deliver this. And those are the partners that we have worked in place with.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Karen. Sipo, let's bring you into this discussion. You're on the ground, as it were, as an educator. In this report, one of the statistics which grabbed my attention is the fact that, disturbing as it is, that around 97.5 million African children from primary school to secondary school age do not attend school. Now, obviously, that's quite startling if we want to make the kind of developmental improvements to our continent that we say that we want to. And this number is higher than in any other region in the world. Having been involved in an online school, which obviously employs this kind of technology, how, in your view and your experience, how can digital education help us bridge this massive divide?
Thanks, thank you. Firstly, I think let's all forget about Australia for a moment and think about immigrating to Kenya because some exciting stuff is happening there. I think I'm particularly challenged because these are the things that we are still thinking about as a country. And I think we have a complex, as South Africans to think, I don't know, we are ahead. We've got this stuff. And here's another example, yet another reminder that we are so behind. We're still thinking about some of this stuff. So really excited to hear the progress that's going on in Kenya. Look, school dropout is a very real issue. I think very hard to separate it from just societal issues. It is a result of the challenges within society. But without delving too deep and getting too philosophical, I think online schooling is part of the answer, right? If we think of the reasons why there are dropouts, there are things that happen within the home, within particular communities that make it difficult for learners to continue the daily commute and the requirements or the commitment needed to go into school and to remain in school. It is not by any means the only answer, but it is part of the solution. I think one of the challenge is a very real issue that there aren't enough schools, and government is not building enough schools fast enough. What if we thought of online education as a partial solution to that issue? Even the fact that we don't have an online school built by the government, for me, is problematic, because it seems the solution that we are wrapped around is that in order to educate, we need to have a physical classroom. In order to educate a child, we need to have a physical infrastructure. Kenya is proving otherwise. The online schools that are being developed are proving otherwise, and they are addressing those challenges. Look, it's not the silver bullet, but it is part of what can be a very viable solution to say the flexibility, if you will, that comes with being in the comfort of your home or being within a community center where you don't have to take a bus or a taxi and have a very demanding daily commute. What if we made that access to education closer, within reach, literally as close as within the comfort of your home, and support that by zero rating, support that by making sure that the infrastructure is there. And maybe we can begin to I must highlight, I'm not saying that it is a simple issue. I think all of us that are in education know that it's a very complex one. But I think we've got to start thinking a bit more practical, and thinking a bit more out of the box than just the answer is building more schools in more places.
Let's build on that. So as we, start thinking differently and creatively and innovatively about online schools and how digital education, for one, can increase access to education, what do we know about what it does about the quality of education and the necessary outcomes that we so desire?
I love that question. I love that question because often looking on the outside in, think access to education means access to quality education. It's not. But you've got to solve the issue of access. And I think if we look at the numeracy and the literacy, I think that's the real pandemic. If we look at the condition of numeracy and literacy across Africa, tells you that even within schools, that there is a problem around the quality of education. So this is meant to be a dual conversation in my view. that as we address access to education, let's have very real solutions on how we are improving the quality of education. Because I'll let you know a little secret. Even the best schools in our country, literally within a stone throw away, there is a thriving after-school industry, multi-million rand industry, that is compensating, right, for the quality of education within our schools. There are maths tutors who are building careers of extra lessons, where the parents are taking their children to schools and they're paying hundreds of thousands of rands, yet the quality is not something that they are confident in, so much so that they are willing to supplement a premium, to make sure that my child doesn't get left behind. So this is really meant to be a dual conversation, that let's not find ourselves where there is a device in every household, there is access to quality resources, yet those resources bring a substandard education.
Yeah.
And then we only start talking about quality of education then.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Sibo. Serena, I want to bring you in here. I think we've heard from the speakers that obviously it's wonderful to have all this access and technology and digital education. We saw its impact, particularly under lockdown. But of course, there still remains the need for personal and human connection in raising children, in educating them. What are some of the challenges that you have encountered as we have this big push towards, yes, more technology, yes, more digital access, etc., but what is lost without having that in-person connection with students?
Thank you, Nikiwe. I think that's such an important question. The thing is that when we implement education, it needs to be done so in a meaningful way. Of course, we can have access, which is critical, but then we also have the child engaging with education, and there needs to be a readiness to learn. And what hinders readiness to learn? If you could allow me to paint the picture, I mean, in South Africa at the moment, and these are things that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, we have a sharp increase in teenage pregnancy. We have some of the highest violence exposure rates in the world, especially community-based violence. Domestic violence has also increased quite significantly during the pandemic. And all of these things are adverse experiences that our kids are exposed to on a daily basis. And what that causes, and of course then poverty as well, is it causes trauma, of course. And what trauma does to the body is it causes dysregulation. Emotion moderates cognition. So if we are not, if we are not in an ideal state to give attention and to engage in educational content, then that becomes problematic. Because even if we have quality content to engage with, if there's not a readiness to engage, then it doesn't help. So I think talking solution focused, we need to partner with or get buy-in from communities to create safe spaces for our kids to engage with digital content. And what I mean by that is spaces that are physically safe, but also spaces that provide psychological safety. There's little use in engaging with education on a platform when you're in a house where you don't feel safe, because there are social factors that play a role. So communities need to create these kind of safe spaces, and I think that's a very critical conversation that we need to have when we talk about implementing digital education in a meaningful way.
Very, very complex, because we often tend to think that technology, of course, as wonderful as it is an enabler, and it's fantastic in how we're going to leapfrog many things, but some of the fundamentals remain undealt with. Prof, let's bring you back in here and back to the study. One of the things that you're recommending is obviously there's a role for everyone to play in these public-private partnerships. There's a role for everyone to contribute something. Big business can, of course, lower the costs of business. governments in their regulatory frameworks can ensure that the infrastructure is there. As ordinary people, what is our role here?
Well, what is an ordinary person? You're extraordinary, you know.
You can stay.
No, look, one of the things we don't talk about is that, and in fact, I'm with some of the colleagues a paper we just submitted today, 2 years of research on the role of parents. Parents were forced to play the role of teacher in different ways. And what do we learn from that can take us forward in post-pandemic times, right? So one of the things clearly that we need to do is to figure out a way how to bring parents into the technology space as well, particularly in working class and poorer communities, so that that parent can work with the kid, right? Let me just also put the cat among the pigeons here. I don't believe in online schools. I think the UCT online school is a mistake because it's access to those who can pay. It's access to those who can pay. And it takes away the one thing that I think you correctly pointed out is, especially in primary schools, the one thing kids needed was a physical connection to other kids and to teachers. And this is particularly true, interestingly, in a subject like mathematics. So we've got very good data on that, right? Where's the teacher as opposed to looking through a screen. The only kids, by the way, for those of you who really want to think more deeply about this, the only kids that benefited from online were those who were bullied at school. They were quite happy to go online, you know, and the introverts, etc. But by and large, kids said, I miss my teacher. Have you ever heard a South African kid saying, I'm missing my teacher? I mean, this is crazy, right? So I thought the UCD online school was a mistake, and I said that in public, because it's a middle-class invention, actually. And we need to figure out how to connect kids. But you are absolutely correct. It's part of the solution. It's not the whole solution. The whole solution is hybrid. So when you're talking about Kenya's not saying set up a whole lot of online schools. It's saying, what do we do with the schools that are out there? And equip them with the infrastructure so that when that school is rural and distant, or when that school, there's a storm in the area, and so on and so forth, that school can remain connected to teaching and learning in a way that it wouldn't otherwise. And so for me, that is the crucial factor. Let me just make this very clear. When I talk to people like Slim Karim, when I talk to people like Shabir Mahdi, the vaccinologist and the infectious diseases expert, they're very clear that there will be other pandemics in the future, right? There will be other disruptions. Think of Inanda in KwaZulu-Natal today, and the disruption in those communities where kids are cut off from school, right? If we don't learn as South Africans one lesson from the pandemic, and that is your government has to act now, in peacetime, if you will, to set up the infrastructure that allows us that when there is the next disruption, the children in the bottom 2/3 of the system are not disadvantaged. You with me? Because, to be honest with you, if this happens again, and we are again unprepared, and again the rich get richer, if you know what I mean, in educational terms, then we're screwed.
What do you hope, or what would you want to achieve with the knowledge that you've generated from this particular paper? I ask because we're good at generating knowledge and navel-gazing and, you know, identifying the challenges and the problems and proposing solutions. However, we're very poor at enacting them, at implementing them. How do we take this forward with the relevant governments across the continent?
Right. So I think, first of all, I don't know Kenya as well as I know Zimbabwe and Namibia, but I wouldn't start with the national government, certainly not in this country. I would go to the provinces. The problem with the provinces is, once again, Gauteng and the Western Cape actually set aside budgets, okay, in order to connect children. The bigger provinces, where the need is greatest, like Limpopo, KZN, Eastern Cape, don't have that kind of. But I would start with the provincial governments, because after all, per the constitution, they're the implementers of education, and try and convince them to begin setting up those infrastructures, those centers with affordable data, those innovations. Because if you can, this has come out strongly in our report, and this was something I picked up from Vodacom. If you can connect all the local initiatives, you have a much more powerful network than if everybody just works by themselves. As you were sort of saying, you're looking for connectivity also at a networking of resources level. But that's what I would say. I wouldn't go to Minister Angie. I don't think she's got a clue. I would definitely go.
But is there a role for continental bodies, say, the
And
AU,
there's there isn't.
no.
There isn't. So take the SDGs, for example. In our report, it's very clear that no matter what you do, we're never going to meet. That's why I've never believed in the SDGs, for the same reason I never believe in education for all, because there are other reasons for creating policy. My students don't like this until I ask them a question, and that is, why do you think Zimbabwe has a submarine? Then they get it, that there are other purposes for policy, okay? And that is to be part of the community of nations. That is in part for when you go to the UN, you can sort of say, we also have a digital policy, but actually you don't care about it. That's why I suppose as you get older, Nakiwe, you begin to realize you're running out of time, and you don't have time for these young people in the departments that talk in flowery language. I sort of say, what can change tomorrow morning? What can change tomorrow morning, if you listen carefully to the Kenya story, it's local initiative that says, let's get things going, and then you use the phrase which was beautiful, and then government comes and say, we want to be part of the party. But don't start as South Africans believing that Pretoria will provide.
No, it is, valid points, very interesting, about how unwieldy and sluggish the state can be. I think we're well aware of that challenge in South Africa. But I do want us to broaden the conversation because it is a continent-wide study. One of the other things that is highlighted in this report as hurdles to be overcome in creating and generating the content for these online platforms or digital education is language. To what extent are we bridging that, Karen, in terms of that locally driven initiative and the various languages, and accessing those tools in language that is understood and not, say, in English or French, etc., etc.?
So that's a very good question, because when we started digitizing education in Kenya, we have the Kenya Institute of Curricular Development. So we decided as a business, we don't know education. What we are going to do is look for the people the government has mandated to do this content. And so we went to the Kenya Institute of Curricular Development and said, we're going to help you digitize all education content in Kenya. So they sat down, they have the curriculum, they have the content, they have translated it into the languages we need. And the good thing with Kenya is that, unlike South Africa, you have 11 national languages. Yeah. So we have just English and Swahili. Yeah. And so we just needed to translate the curricula into 2 languages. The mother tongues are there.
Now we definitely emigrating.
It's because South Africa is unique. So the curriculum was there. All we needed to do is give it the technology boost it needed. And I just have to respond to something you said. In Kenya, education is a national. It's held at the government, at the national government, not at the county government. It is not devolved. And that's why it was easier for us to progress. Because right now, and for the first time, we have a hungry government. Yeah, a government that wants to please us. Because they know we are awake. They have 5 years to please us or they're out. So the government has learned that they, as Kenyans, they have increased taxes for us. Now we have a right to demand more, from education to health to infrastructure. So I feel like we are at a very interesting point as a country where we are holding the government to deliver. So I was reading, and in the past I didn't care about those cabinet papers and the cabinet meetings. In this government, the Monday meeting, the agenda was digital transformation. And this Friday, we are launching the e-citizen again, relaunching how government is going to give us services digitally. We don't want to go queue in government offices. They have made digital left, right, and center. And who ends up benefiting? Safaricom. Because we were ready with the platform. We are running the government's e-citizen. any service the government will provide will pass through our technology platform. And now we call ourselves the partner of choice for government to deliver digital. They have this digital superhighway they're working on, which we love so much. Let's see where the highway is taking us. So for me, from where I sit, I think when the people know what they want and hold the responsible people accountable for this, yeah? So, and then you set a few examples from the private sector. We run a school. We have a school. We have the M-Pesa Foundation Academy. It's a digital academy. When our children, the pandemic hit, we gave them tablets and we extended this to other children. And these children in this academy are needy, bright, future leaders of Kenya. And that's why at Vodacom the program is called Connected Education. In Kenya we are calling it Citizens of the Future program, because we want to journey with you from when you're a child to when you finish. People ask us as a business, what's the value? Imagine if you woke up when you're a child, Vodacom is there with you, mama and health, you know, mother, child, to school, to tertiary. There's some little loyalty in future. So we are building our future customers. So for me, education is one of the things that I'm very, very passionate about. And I look at things like universal service funds, and I wonder, do you have that here? So what does the universal service fund do? Yeah? No. I'll leave you to think about that point.
We're preparing to open it up to the floor for your questions to all of our speakers who have given us great insights into what is possible and lots for us to reflect on and think about. So we are going to have a roving microphone and give you an opportunity to put your questions to our speakers. I just wanted to flag that and so you could ready yourself for that. Sipho, I would like for you, I know you're obviously not here speaking for UCT Online School, and you yourself have moved on, but just to respond to what Prof has said earlier on, because it says here in this particular report that digital education can play a role in overcoming inequalities in access to knowledge in divided societies. And yet here we have Prof saying, you know, that it wasn't a great idea, that thing. It's not going to work. It actually amplifies inequalities in South Africa. What's your response?
Yeah, you know, when we were sitting in the waiting room, there was the elephant, the pink elephant in the room, because I know Prof has been a critic of UCT Online High School, and many of what he's highlighted, funny enough, I agree, not only because I've moved on, but I was well aware, even going into UCT, that those were, you know, definitely the challenges. And it goes down to the fundamentals of access. I think UCT Online High School, I mean, it's a for-profit institution. You know, so it was made for those who can afford, right? But I think it would be wrong if we missed the opportunity to see what the potentials are, because what they've been able to do is build from the ground up something that is scalable, leveraged on their knowledge on ed tech and the science of online learning, to say this is what digital education can look like. We can use them as a model, all right? One of the things that many people don't know is they've made their curriculum, they've got a free curriculum. So one that sits on the website, literally, that any individual, any organization can access. The very same curriculum that is used on their own online platform that comes with a whole bunch of stuff, you know, that those that can afford, of course, pay for, but the actual curriculum sits there free for all to use. So that's another opportunity then to say maybe there are micro schools that can pop up, where the challenge is we don't know how to design the material. We don't know how to formulate the material in a way that's transferable to learners, but we do have a center. We do have community leaders who can take care of a group of learners. Maybe we have schools that are struggling, schools that say we don't have enough teachers, but there's an online curriculum, we have a room, we can get people into a room, we don't have to have a master teacher there, we can just give them access to this free curriculum. So what UCT has been able to do, even within the many challenges, that I think we are all publicly aware of, is show that it can be done. But I think the expectation that UCT is only successful if it is non-profit, I think is an unfair one, because that hasn't been the claim. It is a business, right? It is like any other business, and any other school, by the way. Not every school is for everybody. The same way that you go through a process of selecting a school that works for you, even an online school as it stands, but the potential that it's been able to demonstrate we can tap into in terms of digitizing education and opening up that access, I think that's one that can take some merit.
I think a large part of our focus has been on learners, on we have not necessarily focused on teachers themselves and educators and the extent to which they are ready to embrace these new technologies. Are we doing enough to support and provide them with the digital literacy as it pertains particularly to the challenges that we face about declining standards of general numeracy and literacy across the board?
We're not, and I'd love for Dr. Diaga to give some insights just from her standpoint in the teacher training space. But again, just to draw a bit of my experience at UCT, we couldn't assume that all our educators are digitally ready. We had to assume that they are not. The science of online learning is a very different one, and it has not been done in the basic education sector. This is still it's in its infancy, I think, and the mistake that we've made is comparing it to distant learning.
Yeah.
But distant learning is for adults who are more mature, more responsible, who can navigate that space. But the minute you go into basic education, it's a different ball game. The prof is very correct to say that learners were missing their teachers because that's the guide. Teachers play a pastoral role. Teachers play mom, dad, uncle. The teacher is almost like a byproduct. You need somebody who is there and guiding you through the process of learning. And so that assumption we had to throw out the window and say we've got to teach our teachers from scratch. We've got to train our teachers onto how do you and these were teachers, some with 12, 20 years experience and some fresh out of university, but they all had one thing in common: they'd never done this before. And so we had to break down some of those assumptions and introduce a new way of teaching and transferring quality knowledge to a new kind of learner as well, in a very different environment. So yeah, I think a lot still needs to be done, but as it stands, we're not necessarily relying on institutions of higher learning, which is unfortunate. I mean, my hope is that it has been introduced gradually, because this is the future, whether we like it or not. As the prof again said, that the pandemic is going to come. There will be others. There will be other disruptions that we know for sure. Will we be ready as the education sector when we are plummeted again into a similar situation?
Serena, are we bringing educators along with us and arming them sufficiently with the skills for this era?
I think that we're in the process of discovering the needs that there are out there for our teachers in terms of skill development. I think, of course, the pandemic has brought with it brand new challenges in terms of learning how to teach online. If I can share a personal experience of having to teach emergency remote, it was interesting. The one day, of course, we were teaching for blank screens, which is problematic because you want to see the faces of your students, but they don't have data, so we only teach blank screens, and you feel like you're speaking to yourself. And this one student was watching a soccer match. I was listening to him. He was unmuted. And then towards the end of the class, I said to him, but have you did you get anything from this? And he said, ma'am, is there a recording available that I can watch tomorrow? And this was interesting because now these same students had to go into schools for work integrated learning, and they had to teach online. And it was actually quite a poetic justice for them to now teach to the blank screens and find themselves in that position. How do I engage kids on a digital platform? And I think we've only scratched the surface, really. Because in one way, what on earth do you do? How do you engage? How do you really optimize that platform and connect with your learners in a meaningful way? At University of Pretoria, we've embraced this. We've really tried to come up with innovative ways of preparing our students for the new world of teaching. I find that our students are digital natives. It's much easier for them to come up with innovative ways of using technology. But again, it's also the position of the privileged. If you have access to good programs and good computer software and all of those things, and you've spent your life working with these things, it's easy to come up with great solutions. Whereas in other instances, students really struggle to engage in a digital platform because it's the basic things. It's a basic PowerPoint presentation, and it doesn't always translate well in that space. So we've got a long way to go, but if I maybe can just end off by saying this, my experience with students who study education is that they are incredibly resilient because teachers are made of tough stuff. So I'm hopeful. Yeah.
The best note to leave it on. So we've explored themes around access to education and the extent to which technology can help bridge that divide. We've explored the extent to which quality of education may or may not be improved by digital education. We've spoken about some of the hurdles across the various territories and jurisdictions. Some of them have commonalities, such as lack of reliable and consistent electricity, prohibitive costs and access to data, and the lack of digital infrastructure in many of those territories. And what's being proposed here in this particular report is partnerships between public and private players and communities, and in some instances, as we hear, homegrown, local-grown solutions to some of these problems. But of course, ultimately, governments must provide the enabling environment for most of this to be done. I'm going to open it up now to the audience for any questions and thoughts that you'd like to share, any feedback with our speakers. And I see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 raised hands. So what I'll do, I think I'll do the first batch of 4, and then we'll come back for the second round. So I'll start in the left-hand side of the room. If you could just identify yourself and indicate to whom you are posing your question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sibahle. I'm from IT Web. Thank you so much for an insightful discussion. I think I'll leave my question to the floor. We heard there from Shamil talking about how I think we all agree that digital technologies are critical enabler of learning as well as teaching. But it's been quite clear that we haven't really received the kind of outcomes that we are expecting when we introduce digital technologies in the classroom. So I'd like to know where do the issues really lie? Is it the impartation of education between the teacher and the pupils, or are we still having issues like the quality of connectivity, or maybe even just lack of resources? Thank you.
Thank you. Right. The second question here.
Dumelang, everyone. My name is Tebulo Mutsakhare. I am an educator first and foremost, but I'm here wearing a different hat representing an organization called Connect Hub that is obviously very interested in this kind of conversation. I think my conversation was more so to Sipho. As a practitioner, I think access is one part of the problem or the dialogue that we need to have. But how do we also talk about what we teach and the reasons why we teach what we teach? Because I think that given the kind of challenges that we have, we really need to look at the curriculum that we are imparting for our learners, right? So, and I took this a little bit personally. In 2015, former President Thabo Mbeki, when he was giving a talk at the Nelson Mandela University, he said that we need to interrogate this thing, because you go into university, you study a BA, which I did, and he says, what are you going to do with that BA? So beyond access, I think what we also need to be talking about is, why do we teach what we teach, and for what purpose? What are we trying to get our learners to really grapple with beyond school? Thanks.
I think there's a question in the back of the room and here.
My question is actually to the panel. My name is Johnny Muteba from the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce. For this conversation, I'm wearing the hat of Blacks in Technology Foundation. It's a US-based foundation that I brought to South Africa in 2021. So we are looking at how we can kind of bridge the divide, the racial, economic divide through technology in South Africa, addressing issues around access, lack of skills for the 21st century, lack of opportunities for investment in SMEs. But primarily to Safaricom, what role do you think the diaspora can play in terms of exchange of skills? Kenya is a very, very big diaspora, literally all over the globe. How do we strengthen the capacity of Africans outside of the continent? If you look at India, for example, India is kind of dominating Silicon Valley now. What is India doing that we as a continent can do? But I think also, quite importantly, strengthening this partnership between the private sector, the public sector, and in my case, representing the Chamber of Commerce, the SME sector when it's come to ownership in terms of technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. I think for Safaricom, we are bringing the Blacks in Technology Conference to Kenya this year, I think around August, so we need to talk. Maybe you can give us some money for this conference. Thank you.
This one more question. The gentleman there.
Thank you very much. John Rowett, a long-time friend of the Foundation and the University of Oxford. My question is directed to Professor Jansen. You talked about the importance of accessing the world. Well, key to that is obviously library provision. We know the problems of libraries not existing in schools, but we know in universities the holdings for the study of the rest of the world are pitiful across most universities. Did your report look at learning from, for example, the Digital Public Library of America, and looking at how you might be able to create, not necessarily on a continent-wide basis, but maybe on a regional basis, a SADC basis, a digital public library which could help to address some of these issues about how do we understand the rest of the world, which at this foundation clearly is so crucial, because Madiba's theme so often was, I want to see young African global citizens who will make the world their theatre of operations. If we don't have those library conditions, we can never realize Madiba's goal.
Thanks, John. Final question for this round at the back, and we'll come back.
Sanbonan, my name is Kosabo Tube. I'm from Tswane Schools Governance Association. Can I just remind everybody who's here and just try to find out from the panel? You remember that in Gauteng, we had what we call Gauteng Online. Just because before it can be online, it was offline. Now, and I'm saying this, I just hope, Sisnikiwe, that if some representative from the government were here, it was going to make it easy if they hear from themselves, because of at some stage when you engage them and want to, expose what you have managed to get in such meetings like this one, it becomes difficult. But I just want to find out from the panel, particular from Professor Johnson, that what then will be the advice to parents? Because I believe that parents, they have a very important role to play. You know, it's good that we've got teachers, but I think Kusipo has indicated that at some stage, some teachers, they are not as we expect them to be. You'll remember at some stage, I think it was 10 to 15 years back, while Barbara Christie was still the MEC of Education, she indicated, she gave, teachers and principals some gadgets, some cell phones. You know, what we experienced is that some teachers, they could not even use that cell phone. It was then. And then when you check today, even it has not changed, because even the correspondence that is from the district, it is still that of a paper. The paper, it is still important. I've seen when we all come today, somebody was using a paper. It is still a paper, but what you want to do is that by the time the paper arrives at school, it has been overtaken by events. Now, I'm saying, one, it is that the role of parents, but two, can I just also hear what will be the role that the teachers who can assist with, we can assist with? And maybe lastly, this BRICS development, what impact do you think it will have on us? Has there any one of you, dear ladies and gentlemen, who has looked into this BRICS thing and just juxtapose what you are having currently and what it is envisaged by BRICS?
Thank you so much. We'll try and get back and take a final round of questions, but for now, let's give our panelists an opportunity to respond. Some of those questions were quite pointed, and some for across the panel. So I'll start then with Professor Janssen, if you could respond to those two questions that were directed at you.
Yes, I like the curriculum question very much, and you are absolutely correct. The danger with this obsession with technology and technology education, we think that the value of education lies in the technology itself. It doesn't. The value of education lies in this most fundamental question in curriculum thinking, which is, what do you teach? What's worth knowing in the first place? Okay? And we don't spend enough time doing that, and thinking that just if you knew some gadgets and tricks and technology access that you're educated. You're not educated. You might be a wizard with the tech, but it doesn't mean you learned the essential values, right, that goes with a good education, like a good BA degree. I also want to make the point, the curriculum in and of itself is meaningless. If South Africans don't know that after 30 years, then I don't know what we've learned. We've had more curriculum reform here than the French, and that says a lot. Okay? And so on. The curriculum is a dead document. It only comes to life in the hands of an expert teacher. I've seen teachers take something as miserable as caps and make the children dance, as they learn, etc. So what you need to do in the context of this discussion on digital, the moment you introduce a digital innovation, you need to do 3 or 4 things at the same time. You need to train the teachers, bring them along. You need to see what's in the curriculum. Is this the appropriate curriculum for what we want to achieve in our society? You need to make sure that the basic infrastructure is there, like data and devices. In other words, you've got to have all of those things together and then move at the same time. It's irresponsible to introduce digital education without training the teachers at the same time. And I know in East Africa they do that, places like Uganda, for example, etc. So this is absolutely crucial. One of the fascinating things we found in our research is a number of teachers, particularly older teachers, who just said, I'm taking early retirement. This technology thing is driving me nuts, okay? That's unfortunate, because that's where the experience lies. So I think, again, in peacetime, in non-disruptive times, what we need to do is, and I want to go to the colleague from Swane, is bring the parents and the teachers into the digital discussion and say, this is what you're going to be able to do. I'm involved as a patron in a project that keeps me far too busy called Math Moms. Math Moms is run out of a really dangerous part of the Cape called Elsa's River. If you haven't heard of Elsa's River, it's normally where you go if you're feeling suicidal, but because somebody will shoot you, you know. But it is easily the most innovative program. And so I will pay your ticket if you're interested to come down to Cape Town, because I want to show you as a parent leader what happens. So what they do is they take unemployed mothers, right, and teach them to read, so that when the children, to do math, sorry, and so when the children come home, they are able to teach them math. Guess what? Some of those unemployed mothers are now employed as mathematics teachers in those schools. Now, it seems to me, if we did the same thing with technology, if we did the same thing with digital, and see the parents as a partner, rather than, oh, I might need you when we shut down, then we would have learned something from the pandemic. John is correct, of course. We did read about this, in East Africa, about digital libraries and so on, but not enough, John, for me to give you anything authoritative on that subject. But it does seem to me, again, with digital libraries, if this becomes a resource in the background that any teacher could download, to use a term, then again, because what are you trying to do here? You're trying to enrich the learning environment. So there's a range of resources, not just one book, but a range of resources that you can draw on in order to encourage learning and so on. So that's what I would say. Yeah, Gauteng Online, let me rather say nothing about that one, you know, etc. I unfortunately have a hard stop in about 5 minutes.
Okay, great. Let's try and zip through the room. Karen, there was a question specifically to you about diaspora and potential partnerships and lessons to be learned from East Africa.
Yeah. So in Kenya right now, we're in the middle of a curriculum change. We had our old curriculum for 30 years, I think. And now we have a new one because we realized that we want to go in a certain direction. The system we had wasn't working. But of course, the people who are used to the old curriculum will resist. So what have we done is to open it up to people with knowledge in this space, be it from the diaspora, be it from wherever, to come, sit on the table and help us move this forward. When I look at the SME question, how are we strengthening partnerships? All the innovations I've talked about have come from the SME section. Different people, Zeraki, Eneza, any digital innovation that Safaricom has hosted on our platform has been from the small and medium and MSMEs that we believe that have the right solution. So we are more solutions oriented, and we bring this across. And if I elevate this a little, looking at the group in which we all operate under the name of Vodacom, we have a very good exchange of knowledge across the region in the countries that Vodacom operates in. And we do sit down as the sustainable business team and in different teams and say, what are you guys doing? What's working for you? So tapping into what the lady talked about, the outcomes we want. What are we doing? What's working in Kenya? What's working in Tanzania? How about South Africa? So there are things that we're not doing right. There are things we are learning, and having sat on this panel and listening to CIFO, I'm excited about the high school, the online. We did this in Kenya in the year 2000, the Africa Virtual University. It was at university level in the year 2000, by the way. But we never thought of getting it to the high school level. So I think there's quite something to be borrowed from there. So for me, it's about what's working in this region. You've pointed out Uganda. What's working there? How do we scan the radar of the diaspora, not just the diaspora outside of Australia and just... I'm a strong believer that African problems will be solved by us Africans. Nobody is coming to save us from these things. Yeah? So we need to apply ourselves and learn to listen to what others who've done it right are doing. And that's where Safaricom, we've gotten it right. And within the Vodacom family, we borrow with so much pride. Seated here, I've already borrowed a few ideas. When I go back, I will customize them to Kenyan context, and you'll be seeing our high school beating yours very soon.
Thank you so much, Karen. Prof, I know you have to go, so let us release you before we get responses from the other panelists. Thank you for your leadership and your dynamism. And yes,
Can I just say one?
please.
I'm listening to this audience respond to our colleague from Kenya. One of the and I was overjoyed. one of the things that weighs very heavily on my heart is xenophobia in our country. And one of the things that digital inclusion in a continental sense can do is to be norm breaking. And if in the way we responded to our sister today is also the way we respond on the streets, is also the way we respond in Diepswit or in the Dorens, then I think digital also has social value in helping us to find our common humanity. I just want to say
Thank
that.
you so much, Prof. And wonderful note to leave it on with you. And once again, thank you so much for driving this process. Thank you. Sipho, I wanted you to respond to some of the questions that were put to you and Serena as well.
Thank you. I think Prof touched on a few of them. Hey, Kenya. You know, if we look at some of the countries that are really successful in education, there's a particular culture of education. There's a particular culture of learning that is known across a society. I think part of our challenge is we have a problematic culture of learning and a culture of education. There's an expectation that learning is the responsibility of an institution, but the reality is that it's a partnership, right? Learning is social and emotional. I think Dr. Diago would agree with me that there's an emotional aspect that if one's well-being is not taken care of, it hinders on their cognitive ability, right? If one's social experience is challenging, again, it hampers on what they're able to do cognitively. So those things all need to come together, and I think that's where I see the role of the parent. The expectation for you as a parent is not to be a subject matter expert. That's what the school is taking care of. But you can't expect the school to be a social and emotional meta expert. Those are the things that are taken care of in the home. So I think, you know, just to the question of what can parents do, I think we're asking it from the wrong angle, because I know that question is asking, how can I teach my child maths? How can I teach my child, business studies? That's the wrong question. The question you should be asking is, how do I make the home environment where I have control a conducive one for learning, where my child feels supported, where my child feels encouraged, where my child's confidence is built up when they do come home with an E or a D? Do they go back beaten and bruised emotionally, or do they come out of the home encouraged that you can do better? I don't know how to teach you, but I believe in you because you are my child. And that's the role fundamentally of the parent. And I think that's what we should be striving towards when we are building a healthy culture of learning, where the parent is seen as a partner in that. You're not expected to teach your child Pythagoras theorem. You yourself, you had the chance and you failed. Leave it alone.
How did
Just
you know? Super, thank you so much. As we near towards wrapping up and conclusion, Serena, your response to some of the questions raised today.
Thank you. I would just like to add on to what you've said, Sipho. It's so important. When thinking about the Pearls report and the literacy levels of our kids, what they discussed in the report was also the amount of learning time that we lost due to the pandemic. But what's interesting is that Brazil actually lost a lot more learning time than we did, but their literacy levels are higher, and the question is why. And interestingly enough, what they've managed to do is to get books in the home, with a really big drive in terms of libraries, and getting books into kids' hands. And then it comes back to this social emotional connection, because again, if emotion moderates cognition, reading becomes real for you when you sit on the lap of someone that cares enough to page through the book with you. That person doesn't even have to be able to read. It means that they make you feel safe. And that connects you to the content in a meaningful way. So I just like to say, yes, absolutely, I agree with you 100%. And I think we can no longer ignore looking at education and at specifically learning in a holistic way. We're human beings. And just to respond to something that you said in your question, what is the purpose of education and what is the purpose of what we teach? I always tell my students, doing postgrad studies, for example, is not about what you learn, it's about who you become. Because when you do a PhD, it's irrelevant in 10 years' time. And it's sad to think about it because you look at this beautifully bound script, and it took you 4 years to do it. But in 10 years' time, it's irrelevant. But who you become through that process, that's forever. And I think we need to foreground that when we talk about education, because then curriculum content becomes less relevant. It's about teaching and teacher training specifically being focused on training teachers to be wise, to navigate the complexity of human beings in their classrooms and making teaching and learning a meaningful experience. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm afraid I know I had promised another round of questions, but we have run out of time, well after midday. But what I can assure you is that most of our speakers will stay on for the networking session. So please do reach out to them during that particular networking session to pose your questions to them. And join me in extending a hearty thanks for their wonderful insights and experience that they've shared, drawing from this particular research and their own worldview and perspectives from across the continent. And I think all of us have been enriched and inspired by this conversation. A big round of applause to our panelists this morning. To conclude, I'd like to call on Byron Kennedy, who is the media liaison and spokesperson for Vodacom Group, just to give us his concluding thoughts and next steps, I think, Byron, in terms of how do we get this research to the right decision makers and to propel us and to make the right kinds of decisions. Thank you. Big round of applause for Byron.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much to Nikiwe for facilitating the panel. I think she's done a fantastic job, as she always does. And thanks so much to the panel for imparting the pearls of wisdom that they have this morning. It's been a fantastic discussion to follow. From a Vodacom perspective, we are, as you would have heard Shamil say a little earlier, fully committed to connecting people for a better future, for a more inclusive future, and education is obviously a critical part of that component. And the discussions we've had today are proof that digital technologies can be a game changer for education on the continent. We've heard some of the amazing progress that's been made in Kenya. It would be remiss of me not to remind everyone in the room about Vodacom eSchool, which has seen well over, it's about 1.3 million people register. We saw a big spike in registrations through COVID when learners couldn't go to school themselves, and would have taken a lot from the CAPS curriculum aligned revision type work that runs from grade R right through to grade 12 from that. But very clear from our panelists this morning that private and public partnerships are going to be very important going forward to ensure that companies like Vodacom are able to use our resources to further Africa's digital transformation goals, including in the education sphere. I'd like to encourage you all to download the full research paper, plus the 4 others that form part of the Africa.Connected series. You can get those on the Vodacom.com website, housed in the Africa.Connected section. And to Nikiwe's point about the next steps, the whole point of the Africa.Connected series is to do deep dives into inhibitors, perhaps, into what is if we can unlock that's obviously going to progress the continent and speed things up quite considerably. So please do engage with that paper, and we do hope that it will reach the corners of the continent far and wide. Thank you to everyone that's here this morning. Thank you so much to our media friends that have arrived as well. If there are any interviews that you'd like to conduct on the back of it, Kensani is at the back there. She's giving you a wave. If you haven't already, please have a chat with Kensani about that. But thank you to each and every one of you. I'm sure that the discussion this morning has been as enlightening for you as it was for me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks for your time, and thanks for being here this morning. Thank you very much.
Lunch is served. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think it will be served downstairs. Excellent. Thank you so much. You have no idea.
We customize the content, you learn on your own, and then do the exams as they come. Yeah, because I don't think they have the time to sit and I'm just thinking of what would work. Yeah. Yeah, just